Welcome to the Advanced Sports Analytics Show here on RotoGrinders.com. I'm Jordan Cooper, aka Blender Ed, aka Blender HD, aka hopefully on top of you on the GPP leaderboards this Sunday. It didn't happen this past Sunday, but that's kind of normal. You hit once a year and you're pretty good with it. If you didn't have Darren Waller in the tight end slot, you pretty much couldn't win anything. So I'm joined by the man behind the model at Advanced Sports Analytics. It's Stuart Gibson. Did you have Darren Waller in your tight end slot in some of your lineups?
Yeah, I had I think a good bit of Darren Waller. I had a abysmal cash day, but got bailed out by a decent tournament lineup. Could have been a lot better. Kind of the two guys holding me down were Gaskin and Aguilar, and both definitely had their shots. I felt like Aguilar had, I think, two good chances at a touchdown, and Gaskin had many chances at a touchdown, and that didn't go so well. But
But it highlights, but it highlights like the Waller thing. We think in terms of tight end and DST. I think we consider those two positions to be the highest variance positions. But a lot of times on slates, that those positions don't matter. Like there's not one outlier in tight end and DST, but when there is one, the opportunity cost at that position is ridiculously high. So because there's only one of them, I think we don't talk enough about positional scarcity necessarily on this show. I mean, it has nothing to do with correlation, but just from a GPP strategy perspective, that since you're most likely only rostering one tight end and you can only roster one DST, that on many weeks, while the scoring of that position could be flatter, right? We get a tight end that no tight end scores more than 17 points. No defense scores more than 14 points. The difference between having 8 in that slot versus having 10 in that slot may make, I mean, at the very high end, may make the difference between coming in first and coming in seventh. But in a general note, it's not a score that you need to have. But those are the positions where it's very unlikely that there are multiple players. So when you have a Darren Waller scoring 48 points, it's less likely that there's a player that comes anywhere close to it, right? You typically get in DST, one defense scores 26 and the next scoring defense is 12. You don't get like multiple scoring 22 to 26 point defenses or multiple 30 plus tight ends that in the wide receiver position, which you could roster 3 of them plus one in your flex, that let's say there are multiple 40 plus point wide receivers, especially those high end guys, the Adams, the Thomases, the Keenan Allens, that obviously due to the salary, it's unlikely that many people have like all of them in their lineup, right? You'll see and go, well, if you don't have Devontae Adams 40, like you're dead. Well, if he's the only 40 plus point scoring wide receiver, then that could be true. Obviously, they would need to be owned somewhat. But if you have multiple 40 plus point scores, like you'll see the winning lineup. You don't need all of them. You may need 2 of them, but you wouldn't need 3 or 4 of them, only because it's hard to roster all those guys in the same lineup. But when it comes to tight end and defense, like if you do not have Mike Gesicki scored 23 points. Like the difference between him and Darren Waller was 25 points. That you in a large field tourney, you're pretty much dead at that point because you have to fill a tight end slot, and there's one guy that has double the points of anyone else.
So with that in mind, I mean, does that factor into the kind of diversity of your exposure at those positions? I know like at DST, I take a pretty diverse approach where I'm, capping exposure at like 20% per defense. But I think really for me, that comes more from just that there's difficult projectability with defense. I mean, at tight end where there is such an importance on giving yourself the opportunity to get that one guy, if there's going to be one or, giving yourself the opportunity to get one of 2 guys. Do you find yourself like spreading exposure fairly thin at some of these, I guess, positions where there is potentially one premium guy that is going to make the difference? Or do you find yourself, I guess, taking tight exposures and kind of trusting your ability to get that one guy, knowing that if you do get him by having such high exposure to him, you're just at such, a high advantage?
I think from tight end to defense, it's a much different story. Defense is like you can't predict who that 30-point scoring Patriots is going to be on a slate. So yes, I don't take stands. I actually probably take less than you do. Like I typically cap at like 10, 12%, and I'm taking a ton, 100 lineups. I have all the defenses in my pool. So whatever fits. But at tight end, I almost every slate. I mean, you could do this for any position, but it's especially for the tight end. Is that if Travis Kelce's on the slate, I'm playing. I'm never Xing out players like that because there are very few people at that position that could put up a score that you need to have. Travis Kelce could put up 30 points. Some random tight end that may be 2% owned that puts up 30 points on a weird 3-touchdown game, I don't have to worry about as much because they're not owned as much. But when Kelce's on a slate, when Waller's on a slate, when Kittle, when he's healthy, is on a slate, like it doesn't, to me, the matchup doesn't even matter at that point. Like these are players that have 30+ point ceilings that maybe I don't have a ton of them, but I'm going to make some lineups that have a premium tight end. Same thing for running back. We see with guys like Derrick Henry, right? You take a look at Derrick Henry and the floor is suspect because of his lack of involvement in the passing game. But Derrick Henry on any slate in any matchup could put up 45 fantasy points because he breaks off some 80-yard run. He gets 4 rushing touchdowns or something like that. That, especially when they're lower owned, like they're not going to be unowned, but when they're at least lower owned, like I'm going to make some Derrick Henry lineups. I'm going to make some Dalvin Cook lineups. I'm going to make that. I take a look. I'm going to make Devontae Adams lineups. I'm going to make DK Metcalf lineups. I'm going to take a look at the guys that like have the most chance of putting up a score that you will need to have. Like it will be the Tyreek Hill. I always get exposure to Tyreek Hill. The Chiefs are good, and he can put up a score that is you dust the field completely in it. Do I base my entire strategy around it? No. There may be one-offs. It's not necessarily a stack, but I think it's very important in large field GPPs especially that when you take a look at guys in the 5 or 6K range where it's like, oh, if they give me 25 points, like this is going to be good for GPPs. But they may not have like the ultimate seal, these true top ceilings that I need to prioritize making some lineups. Obviously, it depends on how many you're making. But if I'm making 100 lineups, like I'm going to have at least, I'm going to have a Derrick Henry lineup. I'm going to have a Tyreek Hill line. I mean, like I'm hoping, obviously, that, if he puts up 60 points, that's the right combination in that lineup. But I'm not going to X out players that have like immense ceilings for the positions that they're at. Where if I'm watching Red Zone and the guy, and Tyreek Hill has 200 yards, where I'm just closing my laptop. It's more of the fact of, well, let me see the 4 lineups I have him in, because at least I got him in something, rather than like this past week, so many people were going down at tight end. They're like, tight end sucks, so go down to Ferkser, go down to Akins, take a Robert Tonyan or something, and no one wanted to pay up for Waller based on the lineup construction, the popular lineup construction, and I didn't have a ton of Waller, but I still had about 10, 12%. I made some Waller teams. Of course, they were with Frank Gore, so they got killed because Frank Gore got knocked out second play of the game. But I'm never looking at these guys that, regardless of matchup, you can tell me all you want, oh, bad matchup, low implied team total. Like they're at a position. They have such a wide range of outcomes. They have such a high standard deviation that I don't want to leave myself, especially when I'm making 100+ lineups, like leaving myself with my hand in the garbage. I don't want to have to close my laptop at 4:00 and say, well, why didn't I play any Tyreek Hill? Why didn't I play any Travis Kelce in the tight end spot? But Travis Kelce is 7,400. Yeah, but he could put up 35 points, and then the next tight end could put up 12. So I'm going to have to prioritize these types of players at least in some lineups.
Well, it's an interesting week relative to the last one where, you did have Waller and there was no Kelsey on the main slate. He kind of clearly stood head and shoulders above the rest of the field as far as possible ceiling. This week, we do have Kelsey back. We still have Waller, and there's still a number of compelling tight ends who maybe don't have like the 30 ceiling that Kelsey and Waller have, but still have, nice 20-point ceilings where, it may be a little less predictable as far as kind of what, who is going to lead that position in scoring.
Well, on this slate, since all the bye weeks are done, although with COVID, anything could turn into a bye week for some team, or they're going to play on Wednesday, or they're going to play in the middle. They're going to find some place in the middle of a parking lot and play on a Tuesday afternoon somewhere. But we have 13 games on this Sunday slate, and it's a pretty even split: 7 early, 6 late, and we have a bunch of high total games. So I mean, the spread between the highest total and the lowest total is about 13 and a half points currently, which is like 2 touchdowns. So we have games to target. But obviously with the larger slate and the multiple high team totals, for large field GPPs, you have to prioritize, to me, like that I guess, unless it's select circumstances, that single stacks are going to rule the day. Because in 13 games, there's going to be outliers in multiple of these games that you're most likely going to have to have that one-off piece. So I'm not necessarily, just from a holistic standpoint, when we go through game by game, that I'm less likely to double stack. I mean, I'll still bring back, I still do a skinny stack 1-1 with the 1 bring back. But even if you don't want to bring back players, I think that's perfectly fine. I'm going to look for lineups, and I'm going to run through lineup HQ and see what pops up. But I'm telling you right now, I'm not prioritizing double stacks in large field GPPs. And especially, we're going to get into some of these games where I think that the best case is the skinny stack to begin with.
Yeah, it does seem like some of the teams that are bubbling to the top as far as totals are teams that you just wouldn't want to double stack to begin with. Maybe more willing to double stack if you're going to kind of throw together a few vomit stacks. But yeah, most of the teams towards the top are ones we probably want to pick one pass catcher to pair with the QB anyways. So, but yeah, I mean, that's a good point. The notion of kind of when to lean in heavily on double stacks and when to kind of pull back as you have these 2 extra games, I guess, on the main slate. It's just 2 more games in which some one-off piece can hit, a massive ceiling that even if you kind of nail the double stack and get that second pass catcher right, there's just, 2 extra games, 4 other teams that kind of that second pass catcher has to compete against, and you just lower your chances of hitting the optimal with 2 guys from the same team, 2 pass catchers from the same team, that is.
Right, and you could always experiment. I mean, a good way to determine this is by using a tool like Lineup HQ and using projections. So if you want to sign up for that, Core 4 Premium, $5 off. Click the link in the YouTube description or in the podcast description, rotogrinders.com/media/ASA. You get $5 off Core 4. NFL, NBA is coming back 2 weeks, right? We got preseason stuff. I believe we got some premium preseason stuff for NBA, at PGA, MLB when it comes back. So sign up for that. But you could use Lineup HQ, and a lot of times I use my stack settings, and I just put default. Everything's default, but I'll just put like a 1+1. I'll put a 2+1. I'll put a 3+1, and set them all for 100%. So basically, I'm telling Lineup HQ I want some type of correlation, some type of 2+0, 1+1, something like that. And then based on the median projections, give me the top 300 lineups. And in those 300 lineups, I want to see what teams, I want to see what type, is there a worthy bring back on these certain games? Is there not ones? If am I getting a ton of, Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett and then no one else? And I'm like, okay. And then I could take a look at the configurations of the top 300 and see how many are 3+1s. How many are 2+1s? And you could obviously even go granular into that and go, well, I'm going to set up my stack settings just for 3+1s. And then you run 300 and you see what the top median is, and you see what that range, what teams encompass that range. Because you may have just like one 3+1 stack that's like, that stack's fine based on median projections, but like none of the other ones are. Like Mike, the Glennon vomit stacks, like okay, you could make them, but you're sacrificing like 12 points in median in order to make those stacks compared to a Matt Ryan, expensive Matt Ryan stack that has a higher median and a lower ownership. So like these are things that you can do just mathematically with your projections, with RG projections, with the Blitz projections, whichever projection set you have, and just use lineup HQ, even if you're not making 100 lineups, even if you're just making single entry 3-max type of lineups, you're hand building, but use it as a research tool because the optimizer is just solving a knapsack problem. So, and you just put in all the correlation and all the leverage. Let's say I want a ton of Derrick Henry. I don't want this much of this. What are the best lineups that have this? And it incorporates, if you're a premium member, the ownership. So you could see what the ownership sum of a lineup is and what the median of a lineup is. So you don't necessarily have to target like, oh, I have to think through game by game. It's like you could just use the math and end up seeing like, oh, the Tampa Bay stacks turned out. I mean, I don't know what this is. I haven't run this yet, but you may find a stack that is lower owned that you could build high median lineups with that maybe you wouldn't have realized beforehand if you just looked at like the game in a vacuum.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that those optimizer runs are super useful, even if you are kind of hand building for single or triple entry, where you want to build a lineup or a set of lineups, small set of lineups that are kind of centered around a group of rules, and then you can just run it through and kind of see like, all right, what are the, even if I'm only pulling 3 lineups, like what are the top 50 lineups? What features do they tend to incorporate most frequently? And with that, I think you have a good sense of, I think that is like, it's a very, I find myself using that a lot, using an optimizer iteratively to put together, single entry or 3-max type lineups. So yeah, I think that's good resource to potentially use.
Okay, so let's go through the top total games of the week. Number 1 on the docket, it's Packers at Lions in the Dome, which means if you have the Blitz, that means the Devontae Adams projection is through the roof. It's a 55.5 implied total. It's up 1 point since open. The Packers are a 7.5 point favorite. They have a 31.5 implied team total. The Lions, pretty healthy 24 point implied team total. I mean, to me, the stack makes the most sense. Rodgers, Adams, you're done. Maybe you throw in a Tanyan in the tight end spot if you want to, you want to double stack, at least double stack, with the tight end, which may end up with a more flatter results and outcomes between the tight ends. And then the Lions, I mean, with Golladay out, I'm assuming he'll still be out. You still got Marvin Jones there. You still got Hawkinson. You got, guys like Sanu, I guess, or Cephas. To me, this is the most obvious stacking opportunity because Adams is going to be, I mean, he's probably going to be chalk even at 9,300. Rodgers is going to be like, he's currently projected on, as of Thursday, in Jamino's hamster wheel to be the second highest owned quarterback. On the other hand, the Lions are virtually unowned. So I'm assuming, Stuart, that the Packers are coming up at the top or at least towards the top in the top team probability. But do you think that a better route in large field would be to attack this game from the other side with a Stafford stack and use Adams as the run back just to be different?
Yeah, I mean, like obviously I think Rodgers, Devontae, Marvin Jones is, a perfectly good stack. But it's just, I mean, how many lineups do you think are gonna have Rodgers, Jones, Adams? I mean, it's
Jones
Rodgers
is coming in currently. I mean, Jones, understand that Marvin Jones is priced up. He's now 5,800. And you're going to get the narrative, right? You're going to get Jair Alexander. Are you scared? Are you scared of the wide receiver cornerback matchup? I think maybe, I mean, even Hawkinson, we don't have as much ownership. We really don't have that much ownership on the Lions. I would think that sharper players will play a Lions bring back in a Rodgers Adams stack, but it may not be as much as we think.
Really?
So,
Okay.
so I'm just going by this ownership. I mean, we see if value opens up and ownership switches around, but I would have the same assumption as you, Stuart, that like this seems too obvious. Why don't I attack it as Stafford, Jones, Hawkinson, Adams, like a 3+1 that way? But I mean, I can't argue with we have Marvin Jones currently as less than 1% owned.
But I think you guys
I don't
have
think that's going to
Galladay.
happen.
Yeah, I think Galladay is at least. I'm looking at like the core 4 projections, and I see Galladay, I think, as in.
Okay, so our ownership projects Galladay in, but I'm looking at blitz projections.
Okay, got it. So there's
like the player projections I'm looking at are him out.
Got it. So they're kind of split.
Pops,
yeah.
But our RG ownership projections assumes that Galladay is in. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, regardless, I mean, it just to me just seems like such an obvious stack. I have a hard time believing that anyone that's stacking up Rodgers and Adams isn't going to be bringing back a Lion. Jones, I think, is the most obvious choice. Hawkinson could warrant some inclusion. I mean, I think like it's a great total game and a really good environment. I might be inclined just to leave Rodgers out and just go like Adams loose, or just we've talked about in previous weeks, like insist on having one Viking, whether it be Cook or at least one Viking, even if you don't have Cousins, whether it be Cook, Thielen, Jefferson. I mean, I like the rule of just having one Packer with no Rodgers. And give yourself a decent opportunity to get some Aaron Jones ownership, but leave it to like exactly one Packer. Have lineups where you build stacks through different games, but just have one of Adams or Jones. Because I think like Adams is in a great spot. I don't think my disinterest in stacking this game up comes from the players and their projection. I think it likely is just going to be an ownership thing. I still want exposure to Adams, but maybe try to be different with the QB and kind of core stack you build through, or leave yourself the option to just play Aaron Jones as like a one-off with some sort of maybe a secondary stack with like Aaron Jones plus Marvin Jones, or I don't know, Aaron Jones plus Amendola or Cephas or Hawkinson or something like that. I think to me that would be the route I would want to take. I know we saw last week Jones and Adams kind of get there on that last that late big touchdown by Jones, but historically they've had negative correlation. And in fact, I was just kind of looking at the scatter plot, and this Detroit team last year was the one that seeded that big like 3 touchdown game to Jones last year. I mean, that was a perfect example of kind of one of these games where Jones, I think, put up like 48 fantasy points and Adams only had, I think, like 10 points or something like that. So I think more times than not, if Adams is going to have a great game, Jones is likely to fail. But if Adams fails, it gives Jones an elevated likelihood of having a great game. So I think for me, rather than trying to stack this game up, I might be more inclined to just take individual pieces, and definitely see Jones as a decent leverage point off of Adams. It's kind of a one-off.
As a contrarian way, do you think there's a possibility? What's the probability? Obviously, there's a possibility. Anything's a possibility of stacking Rodgers with Lazard. Okay, so now you're playing a guy that's going to be like 4% owned. He's 5,000. Is there an instance in which Rodgers gets there and to me, I view Adam's salary at 9,300 to be touchdown dependent. Obviously, he gets so many red zone targets. I mean, we see that they pass on the 1 yard line to him. But let's say there is an instance where Adams gets 100 yards. Adams doesn't have a bad game, but he only has 26 fantasy points. Like he doesn't have a score for 9,300. That do you need to have it? Like it'd be great to have it, but he doesn't need to have it. So let's say he goes 12 for 100, right? Which ends up being like 20 25, 26 points. But Allen Lazard goes like 6 for 90 with 2 touchdowns, right? So like for his salary, he's getting the 2 touchdowns. Rodgers obviously has the touchdowns. And now you have the highest total team on the slate. You have the guys that you need from that team, and most people aren't going to have that combination. Do you think that there's enough equity correlatively wise that where Rodgers and Lazard have ceiling outcomes when Adams doesn't? But Adams doesn't have the point that I'm making is that Adams is not sitting there with 10 points. Because if Adams only has 10 points, Rodgers has a snowflake. Like most of the yardage for Rodgers is going to have to come through Adams anyway. But if the touchdowns just go through, Rodgers throws 4 touchdowns, but like 2 or 3 go to other people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a question of like tournament size, right? Like I think you could stomach kind of a 25 from Adams, 25 for Lazard, and like 35 from Rodgers in a small field, 300, 500 person tournament. But as you kind of grow in tournament size, all of a sudden that, 50 combined from Adams and Lazard, while, both have fine games. And obviously that's a great game for Lazard. It's just not going to be enough to get there as you're playing a large field tournament, especially with this large.
But the Lazard piece at 5,000 could be a winning piece.
For sure, yeah, but you would want to have Lazard only,
right?
Plus
that's
Rodgers, right?
Exactly right. I'm talking about being Rodgers Lazard because no one got like the likelihood of that combination is much lower because people have Adams and Adams people get there. They get enough of a score, but not a have to have it score.
Yeah, no, I think that's like a really good play for a big field tournament. As you kind of get smaller, I think the value of that double increases, a little bit relatively, but yeah, I mean the combined ceiling historically between Lazard and Rodgers, like the maximum points they've achieved together is only 62.8. So I don't know what figure that's about 4x their combined salary. So if that is split evenly down the middle, that pays off well for Lazard, not so much for Adams. So yeah, I think an interesting route for sure.
Okay, next game on the docket. We got the Titans at the Jaguars. The total is 52.5. It's down 1 point since open. Titans are a 7.5 point favorite. They have a 30 implied team total. Jaguars 22.5. The thing about the Titans is that it's a matter of how they get there. Because I mean, we take a look and go, well, Derrick Henry could just, it's the Jaguars defense. They're not very good. Henry could have 150 yards and 3 touchdowns, and the stack doesn't get there. Henry gets there. But if the stack gets there, the Tannehill is cheap enough. I mean, 6,700. You have Tannehill, Corey Davis. He's getting more targets than AJ Brown. So like Corey Davis is 5,700. AJ Brown 7,300. We have James Robinson on the other side, which is not a traditional type of run back for an underdog. But James Robinson seems to get there every week. So
yeah, he's been good in that spot in the past couple of weeks. So
right, but we also have Chark. We have some cheap receivers. Based on our ownership currently, Henry is going to be fairly popular. Do you think that, especially on a slate, I don't think running back on this slate is all that appealing. I think that's one of the main reasons why Henry is going to be more owned. Because there's not as much value running back. There's the people that come up in projections well are people that you look at their name and go, really? Like, I'm going to roster that guy. So I think people will stay away. I think there's incredible leverage on playing the passing game. If they have a 30 implied total and the Titans defense is, I mean, the Titans get into more shootouts than anyone else, it seems like, in the NFL. Are we just missing the fact that like AJ Brown at 7%, Corey Davis at 9%, Chark at 5%, that even if you wanted to play the game from the opposite side and play Glennon and then run it back with a Henry Davis Brown type of thing, it just seems like other than the running backs, the ownership of this game is much lower than you would expect for a 52.5 total.
Yeah, I think so. My kind of the caveat, like I'd put, is I think it is a tough game, particularly to double stack up with like Brown plus Davis. They historically haven't had great correlation, and their combined ceiling, hasn't been exceptional. So I think, if stacking the passing side, it probably is going to make sense too. I think it's also just an interesting exercise of kind of like how strong is recency, but how strong is recency bias? Like Brown had this dud of a game and Davis put up a big game, and if ownership is going to shift towards Corey Davis in a big way, I think it, even though he hasn't seen a ton of volume, like we've seen just highly efficient games from AJ Brown in the past, and for a tournament play. I think there could be some equity in just building through like a 1 to 2 long AJ Brown touchdowns with Tannehill. If you want to go on the Corey Davis side, I think if Jonnu Smith is out again, there could be some route to doing like a Davis plus Ferkser again.
Don't talk about Ferkser. Ferkser, he barely played the first half. We all got bailed out on Ferkser on the last drive.
Yeah, I mean, in games that Jonnu's missed, last week, was not one where he's had he didn't have a huge role until the very end. But in previous games that Jonnu's missed, I mean, he's been, at times a spiky receiver where he gets, good usage. I mean, there's a concerning trend in that they've been using Jeff Swain actually more, not as a pass catcher, but just he's been on the field more than Ferkser.
I just wanted to say the caveat to Ferkser because they raised his price $1,100, so it's not like he's minimum price anymore.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so then maybe the route is like Brown plus Tannehill. I'm just really not interested in doing Brown plus Davis. I think with kind of the price hike on Davis and just the slight negative correlation they've historically had, it is a tough kind of pair to stomach.
Well, like I said earlier in the show, I think this is a slate with this many games and many high totals that even in large field GPPs, like I'm going to be single stacking most likely anyway. I'm not going to be playing Brown plus Davis. I'm going to be pairing one of them with Tannehill. And in smaller field, then we could start talking about, if you're playing 1,000 entries or less, then okay, now we could play the super game stacks, those types of things, so you don't have to get every slot right. So to me, it's not a matter of like, I'm pretty much not viewing any of these games as double stackability unless it's something like a tight end where it's like, okay, I get to fill my tight end spot and they're cheap, and who knows if they get a touchdown and 50 yards, they're pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So on the next game on the docket, we got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at home against the Vikings. The Bucs with a 6.5 point favorite, 29 implied team total. Vikings with a 22.5 implied team total. As we've stated many times on this show, like Brady projects well. I mean, you would have to expect that this game is going to feature probably a lot of passing, but the issue is that who do you stack Brady with? Because, could be Godwin, could be Brown, could be Evans. Gronkowski could catch a couple of balls. The most appealing part of this game is actually the underdog because the Vikings have a much more condensed offense. So do you think, even though the Vikings have the lower implied total, they only have a 22.5 total, but if this game turns into a shootout, that the better direction would be on the Viking side? Like to me, it almost feels like, it's kind of weird for me to say because I don't play these types of lineups, that Brady naked with Thielen or Jefferson running back and not even having Godwin, Brown, or Evans may actually be viable because this game, Brady could throw 350 yards and 4 touchdowns and have all
None
4
of these guys
touchdowns go to 4 different people, and no wide receiver has more than 100 yards, and the stack doesn't get there. Even the single stack doesn't get there, but Brady's sitting there with 34 fantasy points.
Huh. I hadn't considered that route, but when you describe it, it does make sense. And I think to the notion of there being kind of more games and number of high totals, it makes that approach, I guess, even more appealing. So I hadn't considered that, but I guess I
something
see
I'm
the thing.
probably not going to do. I rarely ever make
Yeah.
naked, especially naked quarterback stacks where the quarterback's not a rushing quarterback.
Yeah,
Where like
right.
they could rush in 3 touchdowns, those types of things. But like, do I want to get into the business like I did with the Chiefs when they played the Chiefs of, okay, I'm making 100 lineups. I have to set aside 40 of them because I need to pair Brady with this guy and Brady with that guy and Brady with, and then
Yeah.
if I'm doing the Vikings side, I have to do the secondary correlations. Okay, I'm pairing Thielen with Godwin, Thielen with Evans, Thielen with, it's like I feel like
Yeah,
I'm
right.
investing so much money in the game.
Right. I mean, as far as the, which side is more appealing to stack from, I mean, if you are picking a Tampa Bay receiver, you kind of feel like you have to do that if you're, I mean, you obviously do that if you're doing the Brady, well, not obviously as you just described, but, you're going to have to do that on either side. I mean, is there any viability to doing the Minnesota passing side and like Ronald Jones on the Buccaneers side? I mean, he doesn't, he's like not the most likely player to score the most points, but I would say there's probably like what a 70-30 split that a running back scores the most points on the Tampa Bay side of skilled players, 70% chance that a receiver or pass catcher, including Gronkowski, scores the most points on the Tampa Bay side. Well, even though it's more likely that a pass catcher leads Tampa Bay in scoring, there's 3 to 4 pass catchers to choose from. So now you're only talking about like a 20%, at best kind of confidence in any one player. Even if there's 30% on running back, I feel pretty good, especially in kind of the script where Minnesota is playing catch up from behind. That Ronald Jones and Fournette, their role has kind of been dependent on game script. Fournette is used when Tampa Bay is playing from behind. Ronald Jones more when they're playing from ahead. So I do think if you're building on the Minnesota side, you're kind of, and through the receivers, not so much Dalvin Cook, you're kind of working under the assumption that Minnesota's playing from behind. So I don't know, that could be, a different way to go where, you don't feel like you're burning so many lineups trying to get, like you said, that right combination. You're really just using a lineup to get the right kind of game script and the right outcome. You do feel kind of confident that if the game goes where Tampa Bay is up significantly, Minnesota's playing from behind, that Ronald Jones is kind of the likely beneficiary at the running back position.
As you described this, it almost makes me feel like I don't want to roster any of them. It feels to me, based on projections, the Vikings project better than the Bucks. The Vikings are going to be lower owned. We have currently Thielen at 7%, Justin Jefferson at 5%, Dalvin Cook at 7%. In the case of Tampa Bay putting up 35 points, so we're talking about 5 touchdowns, it's quite possible that they could score 35 points and none of the players in the game are in a GPP winning lineup. But in the case that the Bucks put up 35 points and the Vikings need to basically, Cousins needs to throw the ball 45 plus times, like they have such a condensed offense, how does Thielen or Jefferson not get there? Like it almost feels like I prioritize the one-off Vikings players in that game script than the Bucks team, even if the Bucks score. If the final score is 35-21, it almost feels like the Vikings players are the ones with the higher points because there's so few of them. Or if I'm going to stack the Bucks so they're throwing more, that it almost makes sense that that's the lineup that I play Dalvin Cook in. Like I play the opposite game. And now, of course, people aren't going to play Dalvin Cook because the Buccaneers front 7 is so great, right? Matchups and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But he does catch balls out of the backfield, and it's 7% ownership. I mean, we've seen 50-point games out of Dalvin Cook. So to me, I don't know. It just feels weird to say in correlatively, if the Bucks put up a lot of points and the game is close, doesn't that mean that it's more likely that the Vikings players put up ceiling outcomes? Then it's quite possible that none of the Buccaneers. Godwin has 80 yards and a touchdown. Evans, 80 yards and a touchdown. Brown, 80 yards and a touchdown. Ronald Jones, 80 yards rushing and a touchdown. Gronkowski, 80 yards and a touchdown. And you look and like everyone has 17 points. And you're like, well, that stack didn't get. They scored a ton of points, but the stack didn't get there. Maybe Brady has 30 plus, maybe. But then you take a look at your quote run backs, and Thielen, if Cousins had to throw 45 times, Thielen could have 16 targets, right? He could 13 for 150 and 2 touchdowns, and Jefferson could have a 100-yard game also. Like he could have one where 9 for 150 and a touchdown, and you look and it's like, well, the Vikings lost by 2 touchdowns, yet each of the Vikings players put up significantly more points than any of the Bucks.
Yeah, no, it could definitely happen. My fear with the Viking side is like, while a 35-28 outcome is, well within the range, like I think also a 35-13, 35-17 outcome is within the range. We've been, I think, pretty high on this show on Vikings guys week over week. This is like the lowest total we have seen them in quite some time.
But isn't that good? We've seen them when they're favored. The problem with the Vikings when they're favored is that Dalvin Cook's at high salary and his high touch count ends up kind of sucking away from the passing game. And a game script now that is favored for them to pass more. The Vikings tend to, if they could pass 20 times, that limits the upside of Thielen and Jefferson. But if we're predicting a game script like based on the betting lines, they're coming in as 6.5-point underdogs. That all these projections are based around, like in the past, are around Cousins throwing 25 times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Dalvin Cook projects well, and Thielen and Jefferson project decently because of touchdown equity, right? Because the Vikings have a 30-point total, so it's like, yes, of course, the receiver, yeah, okay, they're going to be projected well. Here, it seems like, looking at my projections, that the touchdown equity of the Vikings receivers, Thielen 7,000, Jefferson 7,400, is lower, but their yardage and reception ceiling is higher because the plays that they're going to have to run are going to be more passing plays. So they don't have you're not going to see Olabisi Johnson get 5 targets. You're not going to see Chad Beebe get 7 targets. It's like if they throw 45 times, like how did each of them have like 12 to 15 targets? That's who they throw to.
Yeah, no, you're right.
I'm just thinking it through. I'm just like, it's a low total, but it seems to make sense that if it is a shootout, it's more likely that the Vikings receivers have ceilings more than figuring out what piece of a 5-headed monster the Buccaneers get there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, let's talk about a game that's gonna make us pull our hair out. Okay, this is the game where you're gonna have to. Who knows how you stack this game? Okay, we have the 2 teams that. Oh God, it's a 51.5 total, up 1 point. It's the Colts at the Raiders. Colts are favored by 2.5. They have a 27 implied team total. The Raiders have a 24.5 implied team total. The Colts, as always, have 7 million people that they give the ball to. And then the Raiders, we don't know if Jacobs is going to be in, but most likely he's not. I think Booker's going to be in. But obviously they have Waller. Okay. We get the tight end. But then, Aguilar could be Renfro, could be Ruggs. The Colts have Hilton. They have Pittman. They have Pascal. They have 3 tight ends. They have 3 running backs. It's a 51.5 total, and the Raiders defense is not very good. The Colts defense is average. They in the beginning of the year, they were pretty decent, but they have no problem giving up yardage. I have to assume that the Colts and the Raiders show up as, some decent percent chance of being the top team on the slate. It's just a matter of how the hell do you stack this game?
Yeah, I think to me, the route that seems most obvious is go skinny, Carr plus Waller, and then take like Jonathan Taylor or something like that on the other side. And with the Las Vegas side, I think there are some opportunities to do like Waller plus Aguilar would still be the guy I would prefer, but I think Waller plus Ruggs could make some sense. I think Brandon texted me this week. He said he got I think maybe 2nd or 3rd in the Millionaire Maker with Carr, Ruggs, Waller,
and Perriman put up 3 points. He just needed him to do anything more. He would have won $1 million. Another 6 points, he would have been fine.
Yeah. So I do think, but yeah, sorry. Carr plus Waller, Taylor on the other side, to me makes the most sense. I know Taylor put up a pretty good score last week. I'm just trying to look to see if that came through. I know he had a big touchdown catch. It's
Right.
not like his.
Yeah, pretty much it was all on the touchdown.
Yeah.
Catch.
So, might be if we're kind of looking at game logs. Yeah. I mean, it's not like he had a sub 10% target share, a sub 50% rush share. So, I don't know. You are kind of chasing super high efficiency there.
Well, the
Yeah, the
ownership in
Colt.
this game, I mean, but current ownership, like that, it's all in the single digit. So I mean,
Yeah.
this game could shoot out. The problem is that like it could shoot out and like none of the pieces that matter. Like I mean, it could be as we call in the RG Discord, all troll touchdowns. Right?
Yeah.
You get the Mo Alley Cox touchdown, and then Jalen Richard gets a touchdown, and then Hunter Renfro gets a touchdown. And you're looking around, and it's like you take a look at this game, and like no one, yeah, the game scores 60 plus points, but there's like no one on the game that has more than 20 fantasy points, and it's not going to matter.
Yeah, definitely more concerned with that on the Indianapolis side, which is unfortunate because they're the higher total. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, so it looks like, I mean, Taylor was the lead back. He's had back-to-back weeks with kind of leading the team in rushes. Yeah, I mean that to me that's I don't. It's not a game like I want to. I think like the Tampa Bay Minnesota game, that is a game where there's more value to kind of taking some shots and trying to pick it right. And I think it's equally as difficult to pick it right as this game. Like this game, even if you pick it right, I'm just not convinced there's quite as much ceiling there as that other game. So I don't know. It's not a game that I'm too interested in. Definitely not on the Indianapolis side. So yeah.
Okay, next game on the docket. It's 49.5 total. It's 1 point higher than open. It's the Kansas City Chiefs at the Miami Dolphins. Chiefs are favored by 7.5. Chiefs have a 28.5 implied total. Dolphins have a 21. It's going to be one of those slates where the Chiefs don't have one of the top three. They don't even have one of the top four implied totals. But obviously, Mahomes, Hill, Kelsey. I mean, is it one of those types of things where, like, I don't know how they show up in your top team probability, but they're going to obviously show towards the top. Is it one of those things? Do we think that because of the past, where like just stack the Chiefs and win money? I mean, like, do you think that the Chiefs are going to go overlooked or underlooked on the slate? Because obviously we have Tampa Bay. It's hard to choose. The Titans, people will play Henry and not the passing game. The Packers, yes, okay. Rodgers and Adams will be chalky. And we're going to get to the
There's one
Seahawks
team.
in a minute. Like, do you
Yeah.
think that the ceiling on the Chiefs is actually lower this week because they have a 28.5 point total, but in other games they've had 30 plus point totals. So do you think more, especially at these prices now, where Kelsey's 7,400, Tyreek Hill is 8,500, Mahomes is the most expensive quarterback on the slate at 8,100, that a Mahomes to Hill or a Mahomes to Kelsey stack is not optimal? Or is it the type of thing that I'm just overthinking it? I'm just going, who cares
No,
what the price is? Just stack the Chiefs, and there you go. You're done.
no, I think your thought is right there. I mean, like the price has come up on these guys, the total has come down, and you guys have Kelsey projected as the highest owned tight end, Mahomes highest owned quarterback, and Hill as the fourth highest owned receiver. Like, I think we like Kansas City when they check, at least one box of they're not going to be one of the more popular stacks, or they're just far and away kind of the highest total on the slate, or as a team they're just kind of underpriced. And at least to me, they don't really seem to check any of those boxes this week. And I think I don't know, the one team we haven't talked about is Seattle, and like I think they're similar in terms of price point, and I don't know, to me, just Seattle checks more of those boxes that we're describing. They.
Well, let's talk about Seattle then. I mean, I think we put them both at kind of the same level, similar stack prices. I mean, the difference is that in for the Seattle game, that's only a 46 total, but it's primarily because they're playing the Jets. So Seattle has a 29.75 implied total. The Jets have a 16.25 implied total. So they're a 13.5 point favorite. Is the Seattle stack more in play or even due to the fact that, like, I don't necessarily trust the Seahawks defense anyway, that maybe we could get a Jets run back that gets there. We have Mims that won't be playing, so that may bump up someone like Perriman, who's cheap, right? Their running backs are cheap. Like, the Jets are cheap. So the only concern I have with the Seahawks compared to the Chiefs, and this is from a macro level, is that the Chiefs are a pass first team. So I feel like if the Chiefs put up 28 points, 4 touchdowns, they're most likely 4 passing touchdowns. And then the Seahawks playing the Jets, like, who says that Carson doesn't get in the end zone a couple of times? I mean, how many passes is Pete Carroll going to dial up if they go up 2 touchdowns in this game?
Yeah, you're right. There are more, because we saw the Kansas City team play the Jets earlier this year, and you're right, it was a massive blowout, but Kansas City still stayed, still kind of kept their foot on the gas. And yeah, I'm not sure that Seattle has this kind of exact MO.
They obviously have the feeling. Like, Seattle could go out and put up 35 points. I mean, we've seen that before. Maybe not recently, but I mean, they are playing the Jets.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's you're right. There is blowout risk there. I don't think that's, reason to X out a stack completely. I definitely want to bring back someone on the Jet side. These Seattle pass catchers and pass throwers have positive correlation with the opposition, so we do want. I do feel like it's really kind of important to bring back that guy on the Jet side. Yeah, I mean, there's blowout risk there for sure. I still think there are routes to the Jets kind of keeping it close. Last week against Oakland, they successfully pushed, the Raiders to kind of maintain pass heavy approach. The offense on the Jet side looked a little better last week, and I think Seattle's defense is kind of comparably bad to that of the Raiders. So yeah, while the median kind of game script is one that isn't super favorable towards the Seattle pass catchers and pass throwers, like, I do think there are sizable kind of portions of the distribution of outcomes that work well for a Seattle stack. I just think those distributions are, the outcomes that fall within that distribution that works for Seattle pass catchers, is going to have to include the Jets putting up some sort of fight. So, I think going Perriman, Crowder, maybe Ty Johnson, if Gore is out, are probably reasonable bringbacks on the Jet side.
Are there any other games on your radar as far as stackability and top team probability?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like last week, there's a pretty significant cliff around the 5% probability mark. We have, let's see, count that 6 teams as having a more than 5% chance of scoring the most points. So Green Bay, Seattle, Tennessee, Tampa, Kansas City, Indianapolis, and then the rest of the teams. So what would that be? There's 26 teams minus 6. So yeah, 20 teams, with sub 5%, and the vast majority of those teams are kind of below 3%. So it kind of like last week, there is this pretty stark like split between teams that are, have a good chance of scoring the most points, and then there's a handful of teams that just really don't. But teams that are towards the top, but kind of outside of that elite tier: Atlanta, New Orleans, Carolina.
You mentioned Carolina, and that game has a 49.5 total, But it seems like in our ownership that the Chargers are the more owned side. I mean, not like by like significant amount, but I mean, I would expect like because people look at the Falcons and think they have a bad defense, which I mean they don't have a great defense, but I don't think it's that bad. But the Falcons are the favored team, but like Matt Ryan's going to get some ownership. Julio Jones is going to get some ownership. Calvin Ridley is going to get some ownership. But like Eckler is going to get ownership. Allen's going to get ownership. Like I think the problem is with these stacks is that all these guys are expensive. We're talking about all guys around the 7K range. So if you single stack, let's say you're playing Ryan or Herbert +1 plus a run back on the other side, it almost feels like the Bucks are cheaper, the Vikings are cheaper, the Titans are cheaper, the Packers. I mean, I know with Adams it's not cheaper, but it's better. Like I almost feel like I'm paying too much for the game with the ownership. If you show me ownership at 3% on these guys, that's a different story. I'm more likely to take the risk at their prices. But I get the feeling that the Falcons Chargers game may go a little overowned.
Yeah, I can't really speak to the ownership. I haven't looked at it closely, but yeah, it's an expensive game with somewhat underwhelming totals, at least relative to other games that have similar price tags. I mean, the Chargers are significantly kind of lower likelihood than the Falcons, and they're really as a team at a pretty similar price point. So, I mean, with that just information alone, like give me the team that it's just has a higher total, I guess, if they're going to be the same price, and certainly if the higher total team at the same price is going to be less owned, like that, to me seems like the obvious way to be favored towards. This Carolina side is fairly interesting to me. I guess I just don't really know what to do with Denver and of what is available. There's nothing that really seems super compelling, but
well, I think the compelling part about the Panthers this week, and we were going to find out who the hell is going to be playing.
Yeah, I mean, sure, right.
The thing is that McCaffrey's probably back. DJ
Moore
is going to be out. It's quite possible that Curtis Samuel's out also because of close contact COVID. Like it may be one of these games that it's a lower total, but the Panthers offense may be very, very condensed that, that the Carolina pieces, Robbie Anderson, Christian McCaffrey, maybe a cheap Brandon Zylstra or something like that. Maybe playing. I mean, it's kind of the effect that we get in NBA where, like, oh, parts of the teams are out and they're going to run a 7-man rotation. So it's just by the fact that they're going to be out there more often than any other player on the slate, that they're going to project better at their prices. So like the Panthers are not going to be, I mean, they have a 25-point implied total, so they're not like low. But I'm looking more to monitor that. Like I'm not looking at, if the Panthers were at full strength, I would go meh, right? I would say back and meh, that type of thing.
Yeah, no, I mean this take is conditional on McCaffrey being out. I thought I saw a report that Matt Rule was like saying that there was some other injury that was kind of on their radar with McCaffrey.
Yeah, he got some injury in practice on Wednesday, but who knows? I mean, he also said
didn't practice
today. Mix in Mike Davis, and then he came in and he got like 30 touches. So I mean,
I
don't listen to coaches that much.
Sure. I guess I just, no, you're right. But so I'm looking, just at his little note pop up, and it looks like he didn't practice today. So sorry, this is conditional on McCaffrey being out. If he's in, this game, I think loses a lot of luster because, we just lose confidence in kind of where the volume goes. If McCaffrey's out, though, I mean, I do like, something like Bridgewater to Robbie Anderson, and then if Anderson plus Moore, if Moore plays, isn't a route I want to go. But if Moore,
I can't see Moore playing. He got COVID. I mean, he tested positive. So, like just based on protocol, I mean, like I don't think he could. It's a matter of, is Samuel playing as a close contact? Because I think he tested negative, but he was obviously very close to DJ Moore.
I mean, I thought we've had instances where like didn't Big Ben, or was that like a contact COVID where
Yeah, I think that was a contact code.
Okay, got it. So it's I'm not that not that familiar with kind of what the protocols are.
We didn't realize this season we had to be experts in microbiology in order.
Yeah, I know, seriously.
Who's going to play?
But anyways, I think it's, long story short, I think it's a game with or at least a side with a reasonable total. The pricing on Anderson and Bridgewater to me seem fairly reasonable. I mean, what would you do on the Denver side? I mean, would you go like Fant and just say,
you just say
okay,
you do Fant and you're done, right?
Yeah.
Fill your tight end spot.
Right. I mean, that's kind of, it's not that like I think really Fant is any more correlative than say like Judy or, I mean, I guess Judy, but I guess it's really a position scarcity thing, right? Like Fant to me is one of these guys that could put up a 20-point game at tight end. It seems like he has kind of longer odds than say, Gesicki or something, but obviously longer odds than kind of the elite tight ends. But I don't know. Could be something. It does seem like kind of a monitor type game with all these injury things going on.
And if you're monitoring the games, obviously you're going to send out the updates in your Substack.
Yeah, right. We're gonna do we do a weekly Substack that'll be available tomorrow with kind of some notes around some of the stacks. We also try to put some usage notes in there. What players are kind of having trend up, trend down in terms of their roles. I think one last week that I was really interested in was there was kind of in the short term some increasing usage of the Green Bay, particularly Tanyan as a pass catcher, and the running back passing roles were diminishing at at least a multi-week kind of trend rate. Be something to keep an eye on. But if you guys are interested in that, check it out. We will be tweeting it out from our account, our Twitter account. So maybe that would be a good place to tune into to see when that drops.
That's AS Analytics DFS on Twitter.
Yep, correct.
And you're Start Gibson. If you want to start with Gibson, you start with Gibson on Twitter. I'm Blender HD on Twitter, and if you're in my contests, I hope you're not on the same stacks as me at the same exact lineups. But if Stuart, me, and you, we could tie. I have no problem with my co-host tying in a contest. But if you're not in my contest, then feel free to. Good luck to you out there. So for Stuart Gibson, I'm Jordan Cooper. And this has been the Advanced Sports Analytics Show here on RotoGrinders.com.